19 years of silence cracks open in a storm-lit diner. A waitress spots her missing mother's face inside a billionaire's locket, and a door to old money secrets swings wide. Every clue costs more. Every answer cuts deeper. The only treasure here is the truth they paid to hide. Tell me your city or country, then stick with me to the end. South Boston wore bad weather like an old bruise. Wind slashed down Harbor Street and threw needles of rain at the Harbor Light Diner's fogged windows, turning the neon sign into a smeared pink heartbeat. Inside, the night shift felt longer than usual, grease popping on the flat top, a radio whispering old hits from a back shelf, the bell over the door jittering every time the storm shoved against it. Lila Hart moved through it all like a metronome set to survival. 25. Hair gathered in a quick knot, sneakers damp, apron strings biting her waist. Double shift again. Rent due in 4 days. Evan's inhalers down to 2 puffs each. She counted every step she walked, not for fitness, but for math. Steps were minutes, and minutes were tips, and tips were pills that kept her younger brother's lungs from turning to fists. The Harbor Lights' cracked red booths and laminated menus felt like a second spine at this point. Ugly, functional, unbreakable. She'd learned where the floor dipped, which bar stool wobbled, which coffee urn lied about being full. She could balance 3 plates on one arm and slide a check under a ketchup bottle without making eye contact with a man who wanted more than pancakes. 3 nights a week, always the late side of 9, the stranger took the corner booth by the window. He never quite fit. Tailored charcoal suits and a silk tie in a room that smelled like bacon and bleach. A posture like a question never answered. He ordered black tea he rarely touched, and kept his gaze on the rain-streaked glass, as if the city owed him a confession. The other servers called him 2 things: Mr. Meridian for the company card, and the Ghost for the way his presence seemed to lower the thermostat. Lila had a third name in her head, a problem she didn't have time to solve. The storm tightened. The kitchen printer coughed tickets in clumps. She slid a plate of meatloaf to a regular, checked her watch, felt the press of numbers. Copay, utilities, overdue notice that made a polite threat sound almost kind. Evan would be up late, studying between wheezes, pretending his chest didn't hurt. She'd leave him a note with a doodle so he'd laugh in the morning. She always did. Little rituals kept the floor from opening. A rumble shook the diner, thunder rolling low like a truck downshifting. The door shivered and the bell clanged, and for a second the power blinked. It came back angry, white, hard light that sharpened every scratch on the chrome and etched the stranger's jawline into something carved. Lila refilled the coffee urns, swapped out a tray of pies no one could afford tonight, and took the pot of hot water and a fresh tea bag toward the corner booth. Up close, the man's age showed in controlled details, the faint dusting of gray at his temples, the way his mouth kept a promise it didn't want to keep, the knuckles he flexed once, a habit of measured release. The business pages sometimes drifted through the diner. His face had been there. Bennett Hale, CEO of Hale Meridian Group, a man who built glass towers where sky used to be. He belonged to that world. He looked like a floor-to-ceiling window in a room that never learned to breathe. "Hot water," she said, setting the pot down, voice even, the way you talk to cops and customers and bills. She reached to slide the small plate closer, and the floor betrayed her. One of those dips she usually surfed without thinking. Her sneaker skid half an inch. The pot bumped the heavy ceramic mug. A dark ribbon of tea sloshed over the rim, kissed the cuff of his suit, and bled down a seam as neat as a pen stroke. Lila's stomach dropped. The apologies rose out of her throat on instinct. Years of service industry reflex, but the words tangled. Her hands moved faster, reaching for a clean towel from her apron pocket, blotting without touching. The storm outside laughed against the glass. He looked up, finally. Not at the stain, at her. His eyes were a blue that didn't blink. For a breath, the diner's clatter compressed into something thin and sharp. He didn't curse. He didn't sigh. He just shifted back, angling his shoulder away. An economy of motion, precise enough to be expensive. The suit jacket opened. What flashed inside the fold of fabric didn't belong in the harbor light or in a CEO's armor. A heart-shaped locket, old gold gone soft with thumbprints and years, swung once on a chain and settled against a white shirt that had never seen bleach. The locket's tiny hinge, etched with a delicate scrollwork, had slipped its catch. The storm's light did the rest, catching on enamel no bigger than a dime. Lila didn't mean to look. She looked anyway. Miniature, hand-painted, unsentimental. The portrait was the kind you find in antique stores behind glass. A little world trapped in a circle, dark hair pushed by an invisible wind, eyes the color of a summer thunderhead, a smile you can feel even when it isn't trying to be one. 19 years telescoped in the space between one heartbeat and the next. Her body knew before her mind agreed. 1,000 nights piecing memory out of a single Polaroid. A voice that sang nonsense Italian lullabies over a chipped sink. The echo of a door that shut and didn't open again. Lila felt the room tilt along a hinge she couldn't see. Air thinned. The towel in her hand went heavy. Eleni Marlowe had disappeared when Lila was 6. The photo she kept in a cereal box under a drawer was bleached around the edges, color bleeding toward the middle, fingerprints mapped like continents from too many years of hope. She'd told herself stories. Her mother was a traveler, a dancer, a woman who blinked and the world changed. Truth had always been quieter and meaner. Evictions, men with cash and keys, a city that didn't look back. The locket held the same face. Younger than any version Lila had known, freer than any story she'd told herself to sleep. Not a coincidence. Not a trick of light. Not something a billionaire wears by accident. The room filled with noise again. Grill scrape, cutlery chime, someone laughing too loud because the rain made them giddy. The neon heartbeat outside hiccuped and steadied. Lila's fingers found the edge of the table to keep herself from falling into a past that had never stopped moving. Bennett Hale's gaze flicked from her eyes to the towel, to the locket and back. A triangulation that warned of reflex, not concern. He lifted a hand toward the chain with the same neat efficiency he used for every other task, as if closing the past were no heavier than buttoning a cuff. Lila's voice reached the surface last. Raw, low, a thread pulled through her chest. "That's my mom." The words slipped out before she could strangle them. 3 syllables, trembling, hanging in the damp diner air like smoke. "That's my mom." Bennett Hale froze, hand still poised near the locket, eyes sharpening as if they could cut the sound back out of existence. Around them, the harbor light moved on. Forks clinked, the fryer hissed, the storm lashed. But none of it mattered. The silence between them had its own gravity, pulling everything inward. His voice came first, rougher than his tailored composure allowed. "What did you just say?" Lila's lips wouldn't shape the answer. She only pointed, fingers shaking. toward the tiny painted face resting against his chest. She could hear her own pulse drumming in her ears. It felt insane. This couldn't be real, not after 19 years of half-truths and dead ends. But the portrait wasn't lying. The manager's bark jolted through the kitchen pass-through. "Lila! What's going on out there?" He leaned half out, apron streaked with sauce, trying to make sense of the coffee shards still on the floor. She didn't answer. Couldn't. Her entire world had contracted to one impossible chain of gold. Bennett snapped the locket closed with a metallic click sharp enough to turn heads at nearby tables. He shoved it back under his shirt, as if he could hide the storm it carried. When he looked at her, the usual mask was gone. For a split second, there was something raw, panic maybe, or recognition twisted into fear. Then the wall slammed back down. "You're mistaken," he said flatly, sliding out of the booth. His towering frame eclipsed the neon light bleeding in through the rain. "No, I'm not," Lila heard herself argue, her voice thin but urgent. "Her name was Eleni. I have her picture. It's the same face." He flinched. Just once. The name landed like a thrown stone on still water, rippling across something he'd buried too deep. But he recovered, pulling a wallet from his jacket, peeling a wad of bills thick enough to shame her whole week's wages. He dropped it onto the sticky laminate tabletop, the gesture both dismissive and cruel. "Clean this up," he muttered. Not to her, but toward the manager, who had started waddling over with a mop. Then his eyes cut back to Lila, piercing, furious. "Forget what you think you saw." He strode to the door. The bell screamed in protest as he shoved it open, and the storm swallowed him whole. Tail lights smeared red across wet asphalt. Gone. Lila stayed frozen, gripping the edge of the booth until her knuckles whitened. Her boss grumbled behind her, cursing about broken mugs and lost tips, but she barely heard him. Customers stared openly now, whispering as if they'd witnessed a ghost sighting. Her legs wouldn't move. Her chest felt caged. Only when the last drop of tea cooled on the table did she sink down into the booth opposite the abandoned money. Her reflection warped in the silver napkin dispenser. Pale face, wide eyes, damp hair plastered to her temples. The same storm-colored eyes from the locket. Later that night, the diner closed, but sleep never came. In her small apartment, with the radiator hissing and her brother snoring through restless lungs in the other room, Lila lay awake staring at the cracked ceiling. The questions circled like vultures. Why did a billionaire carry her mother's portrait? Why react with such anger? Why try to bury it under cash? Her father's old story echoed again, the one he'd told with whiskey breath. "She loved you, Lila, but the world was too much. She just left." It had never sat right. Now it felt like a deliberate lie. Lightning split the window. Her mother's smile flashed again in memory, brighter than the storm outside. Lila knew then. She couldn't let this go. This was the first crack in the wall that had stood for 19 years, and she was going to break it wide open. Morning didn't feel like morning. The city groaned awake outside Lila's window. Horns, subway rumbles, the distant grind of garbage trucks. But she lay still on her thin mattress, staring at the photograph pulled from its hiding place in the cereal box. The corners curled like dried leaves, colors faded, but her mother's smile was still there, stubborn and luminous. Eleni Marlowe, vanished without a trace when Lila was 6. Her absence had grown into the wallpaper of Lila's life, stitched into every bill unpaid, every birthday without candles. The diner had been her cage, Survival, her rhythm. But last night cracked the lock. Her phone buzzed, dragging her up. A text from her manager. "You're covering doubles again this week. Don't be late." She almost laughed. The diner's grease-stained ceiling suddenly felt too small for the questions clawing at her chest. Lila opened her battered laptop, its fan wheezing like an asthmatic engine. She typed the only name she had. Bennett Hale. The screen filled instantly. Profiles from Forbes and the Wall Street Journal. Photographs of ribbon cuttings, charity galas, handshakes with mayors. A skyline of glass towers stamped with the Hale Meridian logo. He wasn't just rich, he was infrastructure, power in a three-piece suit. But something else caught her. Widower. No children. His late wife, a socialite named Caroline, had drowned in a boating accident 5 years earlier. There was no mention of Eleni Marlowe, not even a whisper. Her stomach churned. If he had known her mother, he had buried that truth so deep even Google couldn't dig it up. She looked at her mother's photo again, then at her own reflection in the cracked mirror propped against the wall. Same eyes, storm gray. She pulled her hair back into a severe bun, slipped on the thrift store blazer she saved for job interviews, and tucked the photograph into her purse. She didn't belong in glass towers, but that was where the answers lived. By noon, Lila stood on Fifth Avenue, dwarfed by Hale Meridian's headquarters. The skyscraper speared the clouds, its walls polished into a mirror that seemed to erase the rest of the block. People in tailored suits and perfect heels streamed through revolving doors, each one moving like they were late to history. She hesitated. Her sneakers squeaked against the marble steps. The blazer felt tighter, like it knew it didn't belong here. But she pressed forward. Inside, the lobby stretched 3 stories high, all marble and silence. A bronze sculpture twisted in the center like a knot no one could untie. The receptionist behind the granite desk looked like she'd been sculpted too. Flawless hair, flawless nails, flawless disdain. "Can I help you?" Her voice carried the faint boredom of someone used to saying no. "Yes," Lila said, forcing her voice to steady. "I need to see Mr. Bennett Hale." An eyebrow arched, perfect and mocking. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but it's personal. It's urgent." The receptionist didn't even glance at the computer. "Mr. Hale doesn't take walk-ins." "You can leave a message." Frustration flared. Lila leaned closer, palms damp against the cool granite. "Tell him it's Lila Hart, from the Harbor Light Diner. He'll want to see me." The woman's smile didn't reach her eyes. "I doubt that very much." A security guard in a dark suit began striding over, earpiece buzzing. Lila's pulse raced. She couldn't get thrown out now, not before she'd even tried. She reached into her purse and pulled out the faded photograph, sliding it across the desk. Her mother's smile stared up at them from another lifetime. "Just show him this," Lila whispered. Her voice cracked, but didn't break. "If he still refuses, I'll leave. I'll never bother him again." The receptionist blinked. For the first time, her mask slipped. She studied the picture a beat too long before passing it to a man who had quietly approached. Sharp-featured, immaculate, a presence like a blade. "I'll handle this," he said smoothly. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't need to. Authority hung on him like a tailored jacket. He studied the photograph, then Lila. His expression stayed flat, but his eyes narrowed just slightly, betraying recognition. "Wait here," he said, and then he disappeared through the corridor behind the desk. carrying her last piece of proof into the fortress of glass. Every second after felt like an hour. The guard hovered close, the receptionist pretended to work, and Lila stood alone under the weight of marble and money. She knew one thing with terrifying clarity. Her life was about to change, or collapse, depending on whether that photograph opened a door or locked it forever. Minutes stretched like rubber bands about to snap. The marble lobby hummed with silence, every tick of the wall clock louder than traffic outside. Lila's fingers dug into her purse strap, her heart thudding hard enough she feared the guard could hear it. Then the corridor door swung open. The sharp-featured man reappeared, photograph still in hand. His voice was even, but the way his eyes flicked to her and away again carried weight. "Mr. Hale will see you." The receptionist's brows jumped almost imperceptibly. The guard stepped back. For the first time since she walked into the building, the current shifted in her favor. She followed him down a long corridor lined with stark white walls and no windows. Their shoes echoed in tandem until they reached a private elevator. He swiped a card. The doors sighed open, and together they rose in silence. Lila could see their reflections in the mirrored panels. Him composed, unreadable, her pale jaw set, eyes stormy. The elevator opened into a corner office so vast it seemed to float above Manhattan. 3 walls of glass framed the city below like a conquered kingdom. The 4th wall was lined with books and art that probably had their own insurance policies. Bennett Hale stood at the window, hands clasped behind his back, a silhouette carved against steel and sky. He didn't turn when they entered. "Leave us," he said. His voice filled the room like a commandment. The assistant obeyed without hesitation, closing the doors behind him. The hiss of the seal made Lila feel like she'd just been locked in. She stood there awkwardly, cheap blazer suddenly unbearably hot, sneakers squeaking faintly on the polished wood floor. Finally, Bennett turned. His face was harder than stone, but in his hand, resting on the desk, was the golden locket. "You have 5 minutes," he said, voice cold as the glass around them. "Explain why you forced your way into my office and what ridiculous claim you think you have on my past." Lila swallowed, throat dry. She had rehearsed words in her head on the subway, but they scattered now like birds under gunfire. Still, she found her voice. "It's not ridiculous," she said, firmer than she expected. "The woman in your locket is my mother, Eleni Marlowe. She disappeared when I was 6. I've spent 19 years asking questions nobody would answer. Then I saw her face on your chest." Bennett's expression barely shifted, but his jaw tightened, a flicker of something, memory or pain, breaking through. "Her name wasn't Marlowe," he said finally, voice lower, taut. "It was Rossi. Isabella Rossi." The name hit her like cold water. "No, you're wrong. I know my name, my family." He cut her off with a bitter, humorless laugh. "Family? You think I don't know who she was? I met her in college. She wasn't from your world of diners and overdue rent. She was brilliant, alive, reckless. I loved her." His fingers closed around the locket, knuckles pale. Until she vanished. No note, no call. Just gone. She chose to leave me. That's the truth. Lila's head shook before she realized it. "No, that can't be the whole story. My father told me." "Your father?" The word came sharp, almost mocking. His eyes drilled into hers, searching for proof or weakness. "Tell me about this man who filled your head with stories. What name did he give you?" "Daniel Hart." she whispered. Construction worker. He raised me alone. Bennett leaned back slowly, the fortress in his face hardening again. So that's it. She ran, built herself a new life, a new name, a new family. And you, he gestured at her, blazer, sneakers, storm gray eyes. You are the evidence of betrayal I never wanted to see. The words cut deeper than she expected, but beneath the sting rose something sharper, defiance. No, Lila said, stepping forward despite the tremor in her legs. That's the story you told yourself so you could stop hurting. But I know my mother. She wouldn't abandon me. She wouldn't abandon anyone she loved. Somebody else is lying in this story. And if you really cared about her once, if you care about the truth now, you'll help me find out who. For the first time, Bennett's composure cracked. Just a hairline fracture, but she saw it. Doubt glimmering through rage. His hand hovered over the locket, like it was both shield and wound. The office went silent again, save for the whisper of the ventilation system. When he finally spoke, his voice wasn't as steady as he wanted it to be. What do you want from me? Lila didn't blink. The truth. The locket gleamed faintly between them, catching the pale winter light pouring through the glass walls. Bennett's hand lingered over it, as if the metal might burn him. You think truth is simple, he said finally, voice low, almost weary. It isn't. I spent half my life chasing answers that never came. At some point, you learn to live with silence. Lila shook her head. I've lived with silence my whole life. It doesn't heal anything. It just eats you alive. For a moment, neither moved. Then Bennett sank into the massive leather chair behind his desk, exhaling slowly, like the weight of 2 decades had caught up all at once. His eyes fixed on the city beyond the glass, but his words drifted backward in time. I met Isabella Rossi when I was 20. She was studying literature, always quoting poetry she half remembered. She painted badly and laughed loudly. She was nothing like the women my family paraded in front of me. She saw me, not the fortune. For 2 years we were inseparable. I gave her that locket. Lila's heart raced at hearing her mother described with such vividness. It matched flashes from her childhood. Lullabies sung off-key, ink-stained fingers, a stubborn streak that could bend iron. What happened? She asked softly. His jaw clenched. One day she was gone. Her dorm emptied. Friends said she'd dropped out. No note. No explanation. I searched. I hired investigators. It was as if she'd vanished into air. Eventually, I accepted the truth. She chose to leave. She didn't want me, didn't want this life. He gestured broadly at the empire around him. Lila's throat tightened. But she had me. How do you explain that? For the first time, his gaze broke from the skyline and landed on her. The storm in his blue eyes darkened. You think that proves loyalty? To me, it proves betrayal. She ran from me and built another life. She let me believe I wasn't enough. And then she raised a child in secret. You are the proof she wanted me erased. The words struck like glass splinters, sharp and cold. Lila's instinct screamed to push back, but another thought gnawed at her. None of these versions made sense. The woman Bennett described, brilliant, fearless, in love, didn't match the fragile runaway her father had painted. Neither sounded like a mother who would abandon a child. Something was missing. Something was twisted. Her fingers curled into fists. No, that's not the whole story. My mother didn't just vanish into thin air. Someone made her disappear, and I think you know more than you're admitting. Bennett's laugh was short and bitter. Careful, Miss Hart. You're standing in a world you don't understand. Power has teeth. Families like mine don't forgive mistakes. But beneath the warning, she saw something flicker again. Doubt. Maybe even guilt. His fortress was cracking, one truth at a time. Then prove me wrong, she pressed. With all your money, your investigators, your reach, you can uncover what really happened. Help me or admit you're afraid of what you'll find. The challenge landed. He leaned back, silent, thumb rubbing the edge of the locket like a man fingering a scar. Minutes stretched. Finally, he pressed a button on his desk intercom. Thorne, he said, voice heavy. Clear my afternoon. He turned back to Lila, eyes unreadable. One search, one investigation. When it ends in ashes, you leave this alone. Do you understand? Her pulse surged. She nodded. It wasn't trust, but it was a beginning. Bennett closed the locket and tucked it back beneath his shirt. Then we start with your father, Daniel Hart. If he was part of her new life, he holds pieces of the truth. And if there are lies, we'll find them. The hum of the city below filled the silence. Lila stood straighter, clutching her mother's photograph like a weapon. For the first time in 19 years, the silence around her mother's disappearance had cracked. And now the search had officially begun. 2 days blurred together like smudged ink. Lila worked her diner shifts on autopilot, refilling mugs, sliding plates across counters, nodding through conversations she didn't hear. Her body was there, but her mind kept circling that glass-walled office high above the city. She couldn't stop replaying Bennett's words. We start with your father. On the third morning, her phone buzzed with a blocked number. She answered with a dry throat. Be at my office in an hour, Bennett said, then hung up. By the time she arrived, the fortress felt different. Security ushered her upstairs without argument. She found Bennett in a conference room this time, jacket off, sleeves rolled, leaning over a table covered in files and printouts. He looked like a man who hadn't slept, his composure frayed at the edges. We found things, he said, without preamble. Lila's breath hitched. She stepped closer. Spread across the glass table were documents. Birth records, bank statements, old addresses. Bennett tapped one file. Daniel Hart, construction worker. No criminal record. Died 12 years ago of a massive coronary. On paper, nothing unusual. But when we traced his movements, patterns appeared. He and a woman matching Elaine's description moved constantly. New apartments every couple of years. Always paying in cash, leaving no trails. Lila frowned. She was hiding. From me, Bennett countered. But the way his jaw tightened told her he wasn't convinced of his own answer. He slid another document forward. This is from a Blackwood family estate account. My grandmother's. April 1999. A wire transfer of $250,000 to a shell corporation. Same week your mother disappeared. The number sat on the page like a bruise. Lila's pulse hammered. So she was paid to leave you. That's what I believed for years. His voice was grim, but his eyes stayed on the page, as if the ink itself accused him. Except Thorne dug further. 2 days after that transfer, a woman matching her description was admitted to a private clinic in Connecticut. listed as Jane Doe. Reason: exhaustion and monitoring. Emergency contact: Eleanor Hale, my grandmother. Lila's breath caught. So, she didn't take the money? She was taken there? Bennett nodded once, his face pale. That's one possibility. He pushed another paper forward, his hand unsteady for the first time she'd seen. We tracked down a retired nurse. She remembered a young woman brought in by an older, imperious lady, distraught, crying she had to get back to the man she loved. And one more detail: she was 6 weeks pregnant. The word detonated between them. Pregnant. Lila staggered back a step, gripping the table for balance. The room tilted. She forced her eyes down at the affidavit, scanning the words until they blurred. 6 weeks pregnant. Spring 1999. Her age. Her stomach lurched. She looked up at Bennett, and in his eyes she saw it. The dawning horror. The realization ripping through him like glass shards. His lips parted, but no words came. His hands braced on the table, knuckles white. No, he whispered, shaking his head. No, but it fits. The dates, the clinic, the money. She wasn't hiding from me, Tal. She was forced to disappear because she was carrying my child. The room went dead silent. The city roared beneath the glass walls, but it might as well have been miles away. Lila's own heartbeat thundered in her ears. She pressed a trembling hand to her chest. That means, the words broke. You're saying, I'm yours. Bennett's face collapsed, fortress walls shattering into rubble. A sound escaped him, half gasp, half sob. For 25 years, he had lived armored in bitterness. And now the truth stabbed straight through. He turned away, fists clenched, shoulders heaving once before he regained a ragged breath. If this is true, then I abandoned her, and I abandoned you. Lila couldn't move, couldn't breathe. She felt 19 years of unanswered questions shift beneath her feet, the ground rearranging itself into something she didn't recognize. Her entire life had just rewritten itself in one impossible sentence. She wasn't just chasing her mother's ghost anymore. She had just found her father. The revelation sat between them like a live wire, too dangerous to touch, yet impossible to ignore. Lila gripped the back of a chair, her breath ragged. Bennett stood rigid at the head of the table. The locket clenched in his hand so tightly his knuckles bleached white. I wore this, he rasped, eyes fixed on the golden heart. Every day since she vanished. I thought it was penance, a reminder of betrayal. All this time. His voice broke into a hollow laugh. It was a chain around my neck, and you were the lock. Lila's throat tightened. She wanted to scream at him, to demand why he hadn't searched harder, why he'd buried himself in glass towers instead of in the truth. But another part of her, smaller yet undeniable, saw a man gutted by the weight of revelation. Before either could say more, the door opened. Marcus Thorne, Bennett's chief of staff, entered with a folder tucked under one arm. His eyes flicked between their faces, reading the tension like a headline. I thought you should see this. Bennett snatched the folder, flipping it open. Inside were photographs, grainy surveillance shots from years ago. A cheap motel in Pennsylvania. A woman with dark hair slipping inside a door, a child at her hand. Lila's breath caught. Even blurry, she recognized her mother's posture, the way she always leaned slightly to shield her daughter, herself. What is this? She demanded. Thorne's tone was clinical. "The last report filed by a private investigator. Your grandmother, Eleanor Hale, had her followed for years after she disappeared. This was 18 years ago. The investigator noted shouting one night. A man forcing his way into her room. By the time police arrived, both adults were gone. The child was found asleep in the next room." Lila's blood ran cold. Her chest ached with memory, fragmented images she had never pieced together. Raised voices, a door slamming. Then nothing. Bennett's voice shook. So Eleanor knew. She orchestrated it all, and when it turned violent, she let it vanish into silence. Thorne didn't blink. She believed she was protecting the family name. Lila slammed her hand on the table. Protecting it from what? From me? From her? She destroyed everything. Bennett shut the folder with a snap that echoed through the room. His jaw trembled with fury, but his voice came out low, dangerous. Eleanor is gone, but her sister is not. Genevieve Blackwood lives in the Hudson Valley estate. She was Eleanor's confidant. If anyone knows the full truth, it's her. The decision landed heavy, final. They would go together. That evening, rain slicked the windshield of a black sedan as it wound through upstate roads. Lila sat in the back seat, arms folded tight, staring at her reflection in the glass. The storm-gray eyes she'd inherited from Eleni stared back at her like questions without answers. Beside her, Bennett was silent, locked in his own prison of guilt. His hand kept straying to the locket at his chest, thumb rubbing the engraving over and over, as if the metal could give him absolution. Neither spoke, but the air between them pulsed with things unsaid. The Hale estate rose out of the darkness like a fortress from another century. Towers of gray stone, windows glowing faintly behind ivy-choked walls, gardens left to rot in the autumn chill. The car rolled to a stop before iron gates that moaned open on hidden gears. Inside, silence smothered everything. Portraits of severe ancestors glared down from gilt frames. The air smelled of dust and age-old secrets. Genevieve Blackwood waited in a sunroom, frail and birdlike in her wheelchair, wrapped in a shawl the color of ashes. Her eyes, though clouded by time, sharpened when they landed on Lila. My, she whispered, voice like parchment. The resemblance, uncanny. Bennett stepped forward, fists at his sides. Enough games. Tell us what Eleanor did. Tell us why Isabella vanished. Genevieve's lips pressed thin. For a heartbeat, it seemed she might lie, retreat into silence like the generations before her. But then her gaze lingered on Lila. Storm-gray eyes, Eleni's eyes, and the fortress of secrecy trembled. She exhaled, long and heavy. Very well, she said. You deserve to know the cost of Eleanor's choices. The truth was about to cut deeper than either of them imagined. The air in the sunroom thickened, every tick of the ancient grandfather clock a drumbeat of anticipation. Genevieve's frail hands rested on the shawl in her lap, fingers curling like withered branches. She studied Lila as though weighing whether the truth would shatter her or set her free. Eleanor believed she was saving the family. Genevieve began, her voice brittle yet steady. When she learned Isabella was carrying a child, she saw scandal. A fortune tainted by an outsider's blood. She made arrangements. Lila's chest tightened. Arrangements? The old woman's eyes flicked to Bennett, sharp despite their cloudiness. Your grandmother intercepted a letter Isabella wrote to you. She was happy, announcing her pregnancy. Eleanor acted swiftly. She had Isabella taken to a clinic, gave her a choice that was no choice at all. Disappear forever with the child, or lose it entirely. Lila's hand shot to her mouth, her mother's vanishing, her father's silence. Suddenly, it all carried a sinister shape. She chose you, Genevieve said simply, with a flicker of something like respect. She accepted a new identity, money enough to survive, and a man who would play the part of husband and father. Daniel Hart, Bennett muttered, his face dark with realization. He was paid to keep her hidden. Genevieve nodded once. But greed grows. Years later, he demanded more. Eleanor refused. The arrangement soured. Reports reached us of arguments, of instability. And then, her voice faltered, for the first time showing age. She vanished again. Our man followed her to a motel in Pennsylvania. There was shouting. By the time anyone arrived, Isabella was gone. Only the child remained. The silence that followed felt suffocating. Lila's knees weakened, her hands gripping the back of a chair to keep from collapsing. So all those years I thought she abandoned me. She was fighting for me. Her voice cracked. And you all knew. Genevieve's face pinched, but she didn't deny it. I was complicit. I stayed silent. Eleanor had her reasons, I told myself. Family first. Legacy first. Her eyes glistened, a glimmer of remorse piercing decades of ice. But seeing you now, I wonder if the price was too high. Bennett's fists slammed the arm of a chair, the sound startling in the quiet room. His face was carved with fury and grief. Too high? She destroyed my life. She stole the woman I loved, my child. His voice broke, and for the first time in years, tears gathered in his eyes. She left me with nothing but bitterness. The locket slipped from his hand, swinging against his chest like a pendulum of guilt. Lila couldn't stay still. She turned toward the windows, their panes rattling with a cold wind outside. Every breath felt like glass cutting her lungs. The truth was unbearable and liberating all at once. Her mother hadn't walked away. She had sacrificed everything. Behind her, Genevieve's frail voice trembled. I am nearly at the end. My sins are many. But know this. Isabella loved you both. Fiercely. That was her undoing. The words cracked something deep in Bennett. He collapsed into a chair, burying his face in his hands. The titan of industry, the man who commanded towers of steel and armies of lawyers, crumbled under the weight of a secret buried too long. His shoulders shook with guttural sobs that filled the cavernous estate. Lila stood frozen, watching a stranger weep, a stranger who was also her father. Her own tears blurred the world until the portraits on the walls melted into shadows. She stepped closer, unsure, then placed a trembling hand on his shoulder. He looked up, eyes raw, voice ragged. I should have fought harder. For her. For you. I failed. Lila's heart clenched. You didn't know. She hid it to protect me. Protect us. They stayed like that, two broken pieces finally touching, while the echoes of Eleanor's choices lingered in the halls around them. The past was bleeding out at last. But one truth still waited in the shadows, what had truly become of Isabella Marlowe after that night at the motel, and neither of them was ready for the final revelation. The ride back from the estate was silent, the kind of silence that pressed against eardrums until it hurt. Lila stared out the tinted window at dark fields rushing past, her own reflection ghosting in the glass. Behind that reflection, she saw her mother's eyes, storm gray and defiant. She whispered to herself, barely audible, "I'll finish what you started." Bennett sat opposite, hollowed out, the locket clenched in his palm as if it were the only anchor left. His voice finally cracked the quiet. "Genevieve gave us threads, but we still don't know where those threads end. If Isabella was taken, if she fought back." His throat tightened. "We need the truth no matter how ugly." Thorne was waiting when they returned to the tower. He placed another file on the conference table, face grim. "I dug deeper. Daniel Hart didn't just vanish. He resurfaced years later under an alias in Nevada. Sick, living in obscurity." Lila's chest seized. "He's alive?" "Barely," Thorne replied, "and dying men sometimes talk." By dawn, a jet carried them west. Lila barely registered the desert unfolding beneath them. Her nerves frayed to threads. In a shabby hospice on the edge of a faded town, they found him. A gaunt man with hollow cheeks, skin like parchment, tethered to a wheezing oxygen tank. His eyes flickered open when they entered. For a long moment, he only stared at Lila, something like recognition shadowing his features. You look just like her." Her fists clenched at her sides. "Then tell me what happened to my mother." His voice rattled, thin as paper. "We fought. I wanted more money. I threatened to sell the truth, to expose the Blackwoods. She refused, said she wouldn't let you grow up in the crossfire." His eyes glistened. "I hit her. She fell. The sound of her head on the floor." His breath hitched. "She didn't move after that." Lila staggered back, bile rising in her throat. Bennett's face drained of color. "I panicked," Daniel rasped. "Buried her in the woods. Took what little she had left. Left you sleeping in the next room. Told the police she'd run again." He coughed, body shuddering. "A lie. My lie." The room spun. Lila pressed a hand to the wall, nausea tightening her chest. For 19 years, she had carried an emptiness carved by lies. Now she had the truth, and it was worse than every nightmare combined. Bennett's voice thundered, shaking with rage. "You buried her. You let her child grow up thinking she'd been abandoned." He loomed over the bed, fists trembling. Daniel's eyes slid shut. "I killed the only woman who ever loved me, and I ruined the child she died for." Machines beeped unevenly. His breathing grew shallow, ragged. Within minutes, silence fell. Lila stood motionless, her pulse hammering in her ears. She expected relief, answers at last, but what rose in her chest was something heavier. Grief too big to hold. Bennett stepped closer, his hand tentative as he rested it on her shoulder. His voice cracked. "She fought for you, until her last breath. She fought for you." Tears spilled hot down Lila's cheeks. She nodded, though her body trembled. "And I'll fight for her. She deserves more than a grave in the dark." The desert sun was rising as they left the hospice, painting the sky in bruised reds and golds. For the first time, Bennett didn't walk like a fortress. He walked like a man carrying a wound that would never heal, but also a daughter at his side. They had uncovered the ugliest truth, but they had also uncovered something else, each other. And together, they would carry her memory into the light. The funeral was small, almost painfully quiet. Just Lila and Bennett standing side by side at a hillside cemetery overlooking the Hudson River. The wind carried the scent of autumn leaves, sharp and clean, so unlike the smoke and grease of the diner where this all began. The headstone was simple, etched with her true name, Isabella Rossi Marlowe. Below it, a line of poetry she had once written in the margins of a book, "And love shall have no dominion." As the final handful of earth was laid, Bennett's voice broke the silence. "She gave up everything for you," he said softly, his gaze fixed on the stone. "Her future, her freedom, even her life. She chose you over all of it." Lila wiped her cheek, the tears hot against the cold wind. "For so long I thought she'd abandoned me. Now I know she never stopped fighting." Her throat tightened. "She was stronger than either of us realized." The days that followed were disorienting. Bennett insisted she leave her cramped apartment and move into a suite in his penthouse, a cavern of marble and glass that felt more like a museum than a home. At first, Lila couldn't sleep there, the silence too heavy, the luxury too sterile. But slowly, she carved out pieces of herself in the empty spaces, her mother's photograph on the nightstand, her sketchbooks scattered across a room she claimed as a studio. She and Bennett spoke in fragments at first, stories of Elaine's laugh, the way she'd hum when she cooked, how she dreamed of writing novels she never got to finish. Then longer conversations followed. Nights when grief spilled into memory, and memory gave way to something fragile but real: connection. One evening, Bennett found her sketching at the window. He stood quietly, watching the charcoal lines take shape. Finally, he cleared his throat. "I've been thinking," he said. "My foundation has an education endowment. I could fund a scholarship for you, anywhere in the world. Columbia, Oxford, Paris if you want." Lila looked up, caught off guard. But the offer wasn't just about money. It was about recognition. He had seen her, not as a waitress, not as a reminder of betrayal, but as herself, an artist, a daughter. A smile tugged at her lips for the first time in weeks. "I'd like that," she said softly. Bennett's shoulders eased. His smile was small, tentative, but genuine. From his shirt he pulled the locket, fingers lingering on the chain before pressing it into her hand. "This belongs to you now." The metal was warm from his skin. Lila opened it and saw her mother's painted face smiling back, alive in a way no grave could silence. For the first time, the image didn't hurt. It brought peace. She closed the locket around her neck, feeling its weight settle not as a burden, but as a bond. A reminder that love had not been destroyed. It had been hidden, waiting to be unearthed. As the weeks turned to months, the bond between father and daughter grew. Not perfect, not easy, but real. There were awkward silences, clumsy attempts at comfort, moments when grief still swallowed words whole. But there was also laughter, tentative and healing, echoing in halls that had known only cold. Lila knew they could never reclaim the years lost. But they could build something new, shaped not by lies or silence, but by truth and choice. Standing one evening on the penthouse balcony, city lights flickering below, she pressed the locket to her heart and whispered to the night, "We're still here, Mom. You didn't lose us. We found each other." The story of Isabella Rossi was no longer a ghost story. It was a legacy of love, sacrificial, defiant, unbreakable, and Lila knew it was hers to carry forward. With me, this wasn't just a story about secrets and betrayal. It was about the power of love to outlive even the darkest lies, and the courage to seek truth no matter the cost. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because sometimes the stories we tell can help us heal wounds we didn't know we carried.